Here's more Mike Buck on 690 The Answer.
You're listening to the Mike Buck Show.
Oh, yes, it's never too early in the morning to do the tango. Or the tango, What? You mean they dance to the tango? No, that's tango, brother. Not tango. Tango. That's kind of what goes on in the big square building. But I must tell you that, in my opinion, humble as it might be, I think that we are showing a lot more constraint in the big white, in our big square building than in some other places. If you take a look at what goes on in Parliament, in the UK, or if you take a look at the in Japan, what happens when when they're getting together there? I mean, it's like you have to bring your helmet and your boxing gloves. At least Beth Fukumoto Chang today is not wearing a helmet. Good morning.
Good morning.
Isn't it sort of true that, and I imagine you've seen this before, in some places, I know that we've had, little eruptions of our own here, but I mean, it is actually some places it's like a battleground, isn't it?
Yes, it's very tame.
Yeah. In comparison.
Yeah.
Now that being said, you can understand why people don't understand. I don't understand filibustering. We've not really seen it a lot in Hawaii, but it happens. It happens, a little bit. People go on and on.
Yeah. We've had some long speeches.
Okay, let's talk about some of the interesting stuff. First of all, at long last, a lot of the things that needed to get shaken out of the bushes or out of the bushes. There are a lot of things that have died. Going back, that doesn't mean they're bad, does it?
No, there's a lot of reasons a bill can die. Yeah, usually it's not. It's because it wasn't funded.
Let's talk about the one that appears to be coming in. The big bill, I guess, that everybody's talking about, because nobody can understand why Hawaii is one of the only places. It is the only place that doesn't deal with sex trafficking the same way. Governor Ige said no before. Now he's saying yes. Was this, and can you explain how language is sometimes this derails the bill?
Yeah, I think, especially during conference. So we had talked last week about how conference was basically the time when there's no public testimony.
Yeah.
And so during conference, you often see new language added to bills that nobody's vetted.
Yeah.
And it's last minute, and most of us were there till midnight on Friday. Everything's being done at the last minute, and there are sometimes changes made that maybe shouldn't have been made.
One thing that I remember a couple of years back for Obamacare, when those now famous words of then Speaker Pelosi, well, just sign it. We'll read it later.
Right.
Isn't the pressure on sometimes? I mean, this 11th hour stuff, it's for real, isn't it?
Yeah. And sometimes, when you're sitting in committee and you're trying to do a bunch of different drafts and you're negotiating with the Senate, sometimes you're going to be passing bills that nobody's really had time to vet. Now, that's what this weekend is supposed to be for. We're supposed to be vetting things. We have to vote on them tomorrow. So we have sort of 3 days to make sure that we've read everything through.
When you say that, when you're going to make some changes, I think people need to know that, thank goodness, even though there is a lot of pressure today, making changes is a lot quicker because cut and paste and a lot of the technology that's available.
Yeah.
But still, are you sometimes handed something last minute and say, well, now look at this thing?
Oh yeah, and you're looking at a 30-page bill and you're just trying to flip through the changes
what's
really
up?
quickly before you have to vote. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So that must mean a lot of trips to Starbucks over the last couple hours.
It does, yeah. So I think this sex trafficking bill passed. It was one of the last bills we passed on Friday. And I think there are some good changes made from what the governor vetoed. And we'll see. I know at the last minute last year, the prosecutor had come out against it. And that was a lot of why the governor vetoed it.
That being said, we have to remember what roles these folks have. The prosecutors prosecute based on the existing laws.
Right.
They don't have an option.
Right.
That's what they have to do.
Right.
But by the same token, the lawmakers get input from them saying, this is really hard.
Right.
You have to change this somehow. Is that kind of what happened in this thing?
Yeah. And the prosecutor we thought was going to be on board and then turned out he wasn't. So we'll see with this draft if this is the right draft.
What is the harsh reality of what some of you all see? What happens right here in our Honolulu or our Hawaii that rank and file, like, you talk about sex trafficking. I've never seen it. Right. I've suspected it. I've driven through town when somebody says, "Oh, look,"
Right.
but I've never seen it. the people you deal with are right in it, right?
Yeah, I think, the biggest issue is kidnapped minors
Mm-hmm.
who are forced into sex trafficking.
And you think, how could that happen? This is Hawaii. Why can't we find these people?
Right. And it's hard to say why we can't find them. These people, the people that do these kinds of crimes are just very, very good at hiding these kids from us. And it's something that I know in my district we've had a very serious concern because Mililani High School has actually been a site for predators, essentially.
Which is so scary.
It's terrifying that they're looking into suburban communities and trying to basically lure girls into this. And so we do need legislation to fix it and make it easier to prosecute.
Do you think that part of this is going to get dealt with just by people waking up and seeing it's the right thing to do? Because, one of the things that bothers me, I got an email from somebody, even though it's not, her thought or his thought is germane to the conversation. It's not really asking you a question, but it says, what a shame is that there's a demand for this, because if there were no demand, there would be no supply and no girls would be getting kidnapped. Yep. That's really true, isn't it?
It is. Yeah. It is. Yeah. And I think that's, the prosecutor's point is that there's not really a problem as much with the law. It's finding the people that are demanding this and finding the people that are doing the kidnapping. And I think there's just some debate over whether or not passing a new law is going to make a difference. I think it will.
Are some of the groups that help these girls, I know they're very zealous, maybe overzealous in some respects, because they want everything and they don't understand why they can't have it right away. Yeah. But from what I understand, a big third wheel in this is now just not getting kids to traffic for sex because there's visitors or locals coming here that want to buy this goods or services, but also with the exploitation of these young people in video and in online stuff, because that's got to be the biggest canker sore in the mouth of the world.
Right. Yeah.
And does it get called to your attention? I mean, do you get reports from some of these groups that say, hey, look, this is just not somebody walking down Kalakaua Avenue with a string of young girls. This is big, heavy duty stuff.
Yeah, I think video is a little bit harder to trace.
Yeah.
And that's part of it's harder to trace and then, harder to prosecute.
I can tell you one thing, and I've had this comment from many people, and you've probably heard it in research as well. What is available to people on the internet, devious, awful, terrible stuff is available. I mean, it's all over the place. Right. I can't understand. I mean, I can understand free speech and everything else. Everybody knows that. But how can this be thought of as speech or art?
Right. And, you would hope that people would think twice and think, well, some of these kids are trafficked. Yeah. Right. Some people are not doing things, by their own will.
I'm sure you saw the testimony or the statement by a mom who'd been, made anonymous and the voice has been altered. But, how do you deal with a little girl that's been in the worst of the worst? I mean, haven't they aged exponentially in that short period of time they've been captive?
And definitely. And I think that's some of the advocates, that's where a lot of their passion comes from, and their zeal for this is that they've worked with these people one-on-one. This is an issue that's been worked on since I was a staffer at the legislature.
They say it's man's oldest profession, right?
Yeah.
Or the world's oldest profession. Okay, so bottom line is that it looks now as if there's been enough concurrence so that now the prosecutors and the courts will have a document that they can lean on. Or something.
Hopefully. So hopefully the governor signs it. I think it's going to be, we're going to be passing it out on Tuesday.
Tomorrow.
And hoping that the governor will sign this one. Yeah.
Okay. Now, one thing that I did get a couple of emails about, that it's certainly not about politics, but it's about money. And that is, the effort was made by the counties this year a lot stronger for some dilution or some change in the payment of the TAT tax.
Yes, and I have not looked. I can look in a little while. I have not looked at what allocation the committee finally settled on. Because what we were looking at for a while was giving Oahu less and the other counties more. So I'm hoping we didn't settle on that.
I mean, I don't really know if everybody understands it, but even the slightest decimal shift in this has big ramifications for some programs.
Right, because the city doesn't have a lot of options in terms of taxation or revenue.
Well, it does. It has one that's near and dear to me, and that's my property taxes.
Yes, and that's the only one that they have. So, and whatever we give them for the TAT.
I do know, because my wife's a realtor, everybody knows that there's a lot of things to be said for a great boom in real estate.
Mm-hmm.
But a great boom in real estate means higher prices.
Yes.
And that means higher taxes.
Yes.
So the city and county governments are getting more money anyway.
Yes.
Just because the economy is, after 8 years of this,
Mm-hmm.
quicksand that we've been in, that it seems to be coming up in spite of our leadership.
Right.
Or whatever.
Yeah. And they would argue that they need more,
Mhm.
but
Yeah.
we'll see.
It is a pretty fine line that goes through that. So this TAT, the doling out part is still on the table. It's still being looked at.
It is, and
Yeah.
we did pass a bill. A bill came out of committee last week
Mhm.
for the TIT and changing the allocations for the county.
For people that don't understand, when you say changing, that means giving them some more?
Probably in
Mhm.
most cases, but I would have to double check on
Yeah.
this particular bill.
Okay, so that'll get covered. We'll look into that a little bit,
Yeah.
given the opportunity to do research during the break. But there's also some other stuff. And even one thing, Beth, you said, which I think is very key, is that all of the meetings now, the committee, the conferences, are all without any input. But the input to your elected official goes far as what they bring to these meetings, right?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
these committees don't have input, but I hear more from lobbyists and
Sure.
constituents and others in the weeks, because they'll call these 2 weeks. People
Mhm.
call, visit personally.
Some people say that lobbyists are not good for the taxpayers, that lobbyists are good for the people they represent.
Right.
But there are some lobbyists that are for the taxpayers,
Yeah.
like the Tax Foundation and some of these other guys.
Yeah, and I think there's no way a legislator can know everything about every issue.
Yeah.
So lobbyists, sure, they're coming with a particular agenda, but they're also knowledgeable
Mhm.
on issues, more so than because they really studied them. So they can also be helpful.
Is it hard to evade a lobbyist at this time of the year? I mean, this must be, it's desperation time for them too, right?
There are a
Yeah.
couple of lobbyists that people are hiding out from. Yeah.
Okay, you're not hiding out. You can't hide from the Mike Buck Show. We'll be back after our 7:30 break. Beth Fukumoto Chang and I, Minority Monday. It is 7:30. Time for an update with News Director Chaz on time. Good morning, Chaz.
Morning, Mike. Forecasters predict the summer.
Now, back to the Mike Buck Show on 690. The Answer.
Oh, yeah. Sometimes it seems that you're doing the Macarena when you're down at the big square building. Because you got to boogie into this door, boogie out that door. It's like the old one, right? So anyway, the good news is, I guess for some, is that sleep is right around the corner for some of our lawmakers. But not yet. Because this is, I guess, what we would kind of say is sort of crunch time. And during the break, Beth Chang was able to look at an update for the person that wanted to know about the TAT tax. And I think basically, I don't know if it's a compromise or just a delay. What is the current status?
Okay, so $93 million was where the cap was going to be. So
$93 million is the amount of money being given to the counties by the state.
Right.
Through TAT.
And so we cap that amount. Now, of course, it can be less if state revenues are less and if it's more than 93, then the state would keep that money. But we've lifted the cap to 103 instead of 93, which is actually where it's at now. So what was going to happen is that the cap was going to, the 103 million cap was going to expire and go to 93 million, but we've extended that.
Okay. Now that simply means that with the expected uptick that we've been experiencing, that just by osmosis, the counties are going to get a little more money than they've been getting.
They can. But of course, if there's too much more increase, then the state will take the rest of that money after 103 million.
Okay. Exactly. Now let's also zero in on another thing, and that's the what if it doesn't.
Right.
Because I do know that you can have something appropriated based on the council revenues, and this is something that people don't understand.
Yeah.
Aren't what a lot of you are voting on now they would get appropriated. Yes. But that doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to get done and paid for. What are some of the things that would prevent that from happening?
So when we budget, and we've passed the final version of the budget on this week also on Thursday, and when we budget based on an estimate by economists. That's pretty much it. A group of economists get together and they project what the state's revenues are going to be.
Sometimes it's pretty accurate.
It's
Sometimes
usually
it's not, right?
pretty
Yeah,
accurate.
yeah.
But of course, any major event, something like, the recession or
Sure,
some economic crisis, can change that. So if something happens in Japan and our revenues don't come in for tourism, or all sorts of events can change that, at which point, the governor has the right to start restricting release of funds. So he might decide, okay, this $5 million that we put aside for whatever purpose can't go out right
Not
now.
right this
And
minute.
he can decide not to release that money.
Yeah, and that happens.
Yeah.
I mean, it happens a lot. Now, there are some in the tourism business that are saying, look, all of our eggs have been in one basket for too long. So we need to go out to look at all of the inroads being made into China, into South Korea, into other parts of Europe.
Yeah.
Because didn't we rely on the land of the rising sun for a lot of years?
Yeah, and I think, we've been fairly successful at reaching out to other countries now and getting some tourism from other places.
But is it a thin ice that we got to keep making sure that people in Japan don't say, well, what's wrong with us? We've been supporting you for decades,
Yes, I think our whole tourism industry is sort of constantly thin ice, right? I mean, our state's economy is very much dependent on other countries' economies, and that's difficult.
You may remember, Beth, I'm sure a lot of our listeners do, back in the days of the Lingle administration, Governor Lingle's administration was key on relaxing requirements and being a little bit more understanding with visa requests and last minute, because a lot of other countries were saying, hey, here's one way we can best Hawaii. They put up roadblocks. Let's open up some roads.
Yeah,
Are we doing that?
We make it sometimes difficult to get here. I think we try to do our best, but sometimes it's federal. It's a federal issue. So I think we are working on it, and Governor Lingle talked a lot about it when she was running for Senate. I'm not sure that our current delegation pushed that same issue.
There's a lot of things that are coming back around, right? I mean, some of them fiscal. Now, the biggest thing also is, what, if any, control bills or bills are still alive with regards to the rail project? Because it's so contentious now with the departure of Don Horner and some of the other things that are going on. Is to, okay, when's the state going to come in and say, hey, wait a minute, before you do this, you got to do that?
The state is not going to step in. I think unless we have to, we're not going to step in, because the city council has the full authority to do everything, to do the audits, they should be managing the budget. They have the decision to give them the funding or not give them the funding. All the power rests with the city council. So,
is it interesting, though, as a state legislator, how often the subject comes up at the state level?
Oh yeah, people and I'm walking door to door now, and people ask about the rail all the time, and I just have to remind them, you need to be talking to your councilman, and I can talk to the councilman too, but at the end of the day, he is the one with all the power. It's not a state issue. I
want to make sure that people understand, and I know that you probably can't speak for too many districts besides your own, but this interaction between you and the city council person in the area is important.
Absolutely. It's very important, because there's so many issues. People at the end of the day don't care whose responsibility it is. They just want to get it done, right? So there's nothing more irritating to a constituent when they call you about a sidewalk being broken outside their house, and you say, oh, that's not really me, that's the councilman. Why don't you call him instead? Yeah,
that we had a great example of that happening today. I had a call earlier from a disabled guy in a wheelchair who got stuck in a crack in the sidewalk, and the fire department had to come get him out. And of course, there are many, many people where the state says, well, we're going to breathe the sigh of relief because sidewalks are not ours. Yeah. But what about a sidewalk on a state road?
That is a state responsibility. I think what's difficult is, I can, so when people call me for stuff like that, I can talk to the city councilman for them. I can put in the request. But if at the end of the day, the city councilman or the city departments don't want to fix it, I have no power to force them to do it.
But I'm sure that they're going to be the first to call you and say, hey, this is a state matter.
Oh,
I got some constituents that want me to fix something that you guys got to
fix. Call each other back and forth. Yeah.
That it's actually comforting, because I do know that, you're right. People just want to lash out and knee jerk and yell at the first person they can.
Right. And a lot of times people just want to be listened to.
Now, that being said, we talked about this earlier. It is now getting into it's May Day's Lay Day in Hawaii, right? It's the 2nd of May.
Yep.
There's only a couple of weeks left for people to decide if they're going to pull papers and run for office.
Yeah, so June 7th is the last date, so people have about a month to decide right now. Yeah.
And obviously, even people in that are ins or that are running, they want people to run.
Yeah, I think
Unless
people,
it's in your own
right.
house,
I think people that are, I think I'm done with people running in my district. It'd be
Yeah.
awesome if nobody else did.
Yeah.
But I already have opponents.
Mm.
But I think, I really want to see more women. For me,
Mm.
I do think that the legislature is one of the last places, elected office is one of the last places that we don't have sort of
I want to though, as a male, not a chauvinist, but as a male, I want to tell you that I've observed a large increase in the numbers, but
Yes.
maybe just not large enough. Theoretically, at some point in time, it should be 50-50.
Right.
Yeah.
So it should be 50-50 when you look at the population in general.
Yeah.
Right now it's at about 23%.
Mhm.
So definitely women are underrepresented.
Yeah, but what about if you're a woman
Yeah.
and you're running on just that?
Which is not, no.
Yeah,
People, I think, you need to be qualified. You
Yeah.
can't run just because you're a woman or just because you're a minority. You have to be qualified.
Yeah.
And as a woman and a minority, I would want people to vote for me because I'm qualified, not just because I hold some sort of status.
All right, we're going to check traffic and come back and talk with Beth Chang. If you'd like to join the conversation, it's pretty easy. 296 KHNR. Those of you that are ringing on the phone, you hang in there. We'll get right with you. But in the meantime, here's Malin Moore.
Stuck in traffic? Question? Want the answer? It's right here and right now. Here's more of the Mike Buck Show on 690. The Answer.
As you know, we refrain or we try to cut back with email during the program because we don't want anybody to think we stack the deck. But here's one that's sort of interesting. And if there is an exception, Beth Fukumoto Chang, this would be it. This comes from Robert on the island of Kauai. It says, we're listening in Kauai via the internet. There are several gun control bills that are in the legislature. Please ask Beth about their status, which is certainly not a non-political statement. This is but from an interested person. And he says, we listen faithfully every day. Bob on Kauai. Good point, because I do know that there's a lot of concern on the neighbor islands, as there is here on Oahu. And I think there are still several bills, right, that are...
Yes.
What are some of them? What's happening?
So one of the bills is we did pass the one that would disallow you from owning firearms if you're convicted of a misdemeanor, stalking, or sexual harassment.
Okay. What about if you've been guilty of it or if you
convicted? You need to be convicted.
Okay.
So if you've been caught and convicted for stalking,
yeah.
then you can't own a firearm. The other one that was very controversial is entering all gun owners. When you register for a firearm, you get entered into a national background check, which is a criminal background check. So that was particularly why people were most upset. And what it's supposed to do is check if you've had some sort of conviction in another state, which we don't get right now.
Okay, now that would be a conviction, not necessarily a gun conviction, but just a felony or whatever conviction.
Right. Say you had some sort of felony in another state. This system would automatically notify the police so that they know that you can't have a firearm anymore. I think I voted against it because I don't think that we should be putting people into any kind of a national database. I think there's some privacy issues there.
I understand where you're coming from on that. Privacy and all the things we're talking about, but still, you don't want somebody slipping through the cracks, right?
Right. And we have a background check system already in place. This is more just it's a good idea in concept, but a national database of gun owners sounds a lot like a registry.
Wouldn't one be able to, let's say, forget the registry? I agree with the registry.
Right.
But let's say that, all right, wouldn't there still be, with technology today, a way for you to be able to ask a batch of states about somebody?
There should be. Yeah. And that's where, if we can come up with something that's not automatically registering gun owners into a database where we're also registering criminals just because they're gun owners, right? They haven't been convicted of anything. We're just putting them into this database because they're gun owners.
What about in this case, and I know this probably come up, let's say that I move here from Mississippi, and one of the first things I want to list your residence. List your place of residence for the last 10 years or whatever.
So
wouldn't that effectually be a way for the department to say, okay, go look at Mississippi. This guy was in Mississippi. See if he's been convicted of a felony.
Yes, and when the police run the background check, all criminal convictions at that time should come up. The concern comes in if they're not running a background check. Maybe somebody just got their background check, then they went to Mississippi and committed a crime. they have
yeah,
another
still,
6 months or so before they have, or whatever amount of time before they have another background check. So there's going to be that period of time. So this would get rid of that period of time because it would automatically notify the police that there was some sort of criminal activity.
Boy, that's why I'm glad that I asked the question and you're the rep. Okay. What else?
And then the other one that's out there is emergency seizure of firearms, and that one's also been very controversial. Right now we have a law on the books that says if you have a mental illness, if you're getting treatment for addiction, if you've been involuntarily hospitalized, you get your firearms taken away. But right now it says in 30 days the police can take your firearms away.
In 30 days.
You're supposed to give it up willingly. But
so you have 30 days in which to use it before you get it.
Right. I mean, and that's the current law is you have 30 days to give it up voluntarily. So you can sell it, you can whatever you're going to do. If you don't after 30 days, the police can seize it. So this bill would say if you're in an emergency situation, the police can seize it right away, which to me makes a lot of sense.
Well, I can tell you one thing. There was this one lady that called up and she was afraid for her and her kids' safety because her husband was unemployed, he was doing drugs, he was unpredictable, and he had guns.
Right.
And all she had to do was say that, and they came and took him.
Right.
But that is that wasn't a TRO, it wasn't anything like that. It was just a lady being concerned.
Right.
Would it be wise to just do the taking and then look into it, just to make sure?
In theory, but certainly there are a lot of firearms owners that feel like that's an abridgment of their Second Amendment rights. So I think this bill probably strikes a decent balance. It's stuff you can already get your firearms taken away for. It's just that if you're in crisis, if you're right now saying, I'm going to commit suicide or whatever it is, the police can say, okay, I'm going to take your guns. That makes a lot of sense.
Do the police know, and this may not be a fair question, but obviously if there's a domestic or something going on, they have an opportunity to look in. Does this guy have a record? Number one. Yeah. Okay. Does he own guns? I mean, do they do that? One would think.
One would think. I'm not sure that they do, but one would think. And then what they can do and what firearm owners can do is they can, once they're cleared of the medical emergency, or once they've been through addiction treatment, they can apply to get their firearms back. So they stay with HPD and they can apply to get them back. I think it strikes a good balance. There are a lot of people that are going to be unhappy with that, but overall, when I polled my district said they would prefer more gun regulation. So,
it's hard to say, and as I am a firm believer in my right to own a gun, but I also am hard pressed to be able to talk out of the fact that we seem to be, no matter what, not picking up a newspaper and finding out there's been something horrible somewhere.
Right.
Maybe a lot more than there used to be. Maybe that's why people are feeling that way.
I think so, because I would have actually expected my district survey to come back more in favor of less gun control, but people said they want more. So I think.
What about this? We're talking about every now and again there are bills that came up, and I know one came up this year. Maybe it went away, but there's still a strong segment of the society, of our community, I should say, that it wants concealed carry.
Yes, and I had a bill this year to allow we have a concealed carry law, but it's up to the chief of police.
Right, each individual case,
right. And I think that should be a little bit more objective. It shouldn't just come down to one person. So I had a bill to make it slightly more objective, but I think at the end
would that maybe be some form of committee?
It's a committee. It's a board.
To just meet on. You see, here's the thing. Let's say that somebody wants a concealed permit for an imminent feeling of danger. They're going to do it anyway. You know what I mean? They're going to take a chance because they're worried for themselves. But if somebody applies and goes through a vetting system and it takes 30, 45, 60 days, whatever, then would there be reason to think that there should be some people that should be allowed to carry?
I would think
what you
so.
said, right?
That's what I'm saying. Is I think we should have a system that's a little bit better than just the chief of police.
Okay, I want to go off topic for a minute. We've got our perpetual input person, Don from Kaneohe. We had on the Gallagher Law Hour, attorney Anthony Carr and I this weekend featured a guest named McDermott, consequently, not Bob McDermott, the rep, but a John McDermott, who is the ombudsman for the Office of Aging for the state. Okay. And so therefore it's appropriate that we talk to Don. Hey, Don, good morning.
Thank you, Mike, for taking my call.
Sure.
Ben, I just got a question. There was a bill by Rep. Mazzino for the session HB 2005 concerned about having inspectors for the state come in unannounced at big art facilities for care homes, facilities. I understand that bill was gutted dramatically. A lot of opposition about having surprise inspections. I have an aunt on the Winter side in one of those art facilities, and when we go there and visit her, she gets some like bruises and whatnot. We told the family about it, but they said, they were told that she fell down, this and that. But I'm very concerned about the elderly and the horror stories that have come about and people dying in there. So can you give me an update what the state is going to do to reintroduce a bill maybe next session, if that's a possibility?
Yeah, and Don, I'm so glad you asked that, because it, and that it was on the phone rather than a planted email, because what we're talking about is, why would anybody ever react to a random inspection if they weren't afraid that they might be hiding something?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay, Beth?
Yeah, so we this bill was combined with unannounced inspections for medical marijuana facilities.
Sure.
It was in the same bill. The care homes, especially the smaller ones, came out against the bill and said that the reason why they were against it was not because they had something to hide, but because it actually takes their entire day to prepare for an inspection, and it stops doctors' visits, and it's because they have to have somebody in the home. I'm not sure I buy it.
I'm not sure that I buy into that, because I mean, wait a minute. What about a random drug test at work? Right. When you go to work, what about a random drug test for a teacher?
Yeah.
If you tell them, hey, we're coming next Wednesday for your inspection, clean up your act. Right. It's just like the restaurant inspections, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think, there are a couple of different options. I know some of the better care homes have cameras, so they can keep an eye on their employees. That's one option, but unannounced visits seemed like a good idea to me. I was voting yes for it. But there's a very powerful lobby against these visits. So
that's why, Don, it's up in the air.
Yeah,
that's why I'm glad you brought it up.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, you bet. It's interestingly enough, this is exactly the type of case we're talking about, that you can understand both ends.
Yeah.
However, I mean, if you go to a lot of places in the private sector, this. If they say, "Hi, Beth, good morning. Today's you've been randomly selected to do a PP, to see." Yep. That's part of your employment.
Right.
Why wouldn't these homes understand that 24/7, 365, somebody can come up to inspect you?
Right. Yeah. I don't see the problem with it, but.
Okay. What about the number one Beth Fukumoto Chang job of the week? What are you looking at?
I think the biggest thing, and we talked a little bit about this earlier, the biggest thing that I'm excited about right now is Wahiawa General got funding.
You know what? And we didn't get, I want to tell you, it was a joint effort by a lot of people.
Oh, yes. Yes.
And then Marcus Oshiro was, what a flag bearer he was, right?
I think he didn't always help us get the money, to be honest. But all the area reps were able to come in at the last minute and try to get that money.
Terrific. Thanks, Beth, and we'll see you next week. It's going to get interesting. It's crunch time at the big